You know what's unsettling? When someone brings up something you said 3 months ago, word for word, in the exact tone you said it, with the precise context of where you were standing and what you were wearing and what song was playing in the background. And you don't remember saying it at all, but they remember everything. Most people think this is just a good memory, maybe photographic, maybe just attention to detail. The kind of trait that makes someone great at trivia or useful in meetings or impressive at parties. But here's what nobody talks about. People who remember conversations with that level of precision aren't doing it because they have some genetic gift for memory. They're doing it because at some point, usually very early, their survival depended on it. If you're someone who can recall entire conversations from years ago, who remembers not just what was said, but how it was said, the pauses, the shifts in tone, the micro-expressions that accompanied certain words, this isn't random. This is hypervigilance. And hypervigilance doesn't develop because life was calm and predictable. It develops because life was the opposite. Because you grew up in an environment where missing a detail could cost you. Where reading a room wrong meant walking into danger. Where remembering exactly what someone said was the difference between safety and chaos. Picture this. You're 8 years old. Your parent comes home from work and you've learned to read their face before they even take their coat off. You can tell from the way they close the door whether it's a good day or a bad day, whether you should make yourself visible or disappear into your room, whether it's safe to ask for things or whether you need to stay quiet and small and out of the way. But it's more complex than that. Because yesterday, they said you could have a friend over this weekend, you remember the exact words. Maybe Saturday if you clean your room. You cleaned your room, you did everything right. But now, when you bring it up, they look at you like you're lying. I never said that. And suddenly, you're not just disappointed, you're confused, questioning your own memory, wondering if you made it up, except you didn't. You remember the conversation perfectly. You remember where you were standing. You remember the inflection in their voice. You remember everything. And that's when your brain makes a decision. A quiet, unconscious decision that will shape how you process information for the rest of your life. It decides that from now on you're going to remember everything. Every word, every detail, every nuance. Because if you don't, you'll be told you're wrong. You'll be gaslit. You'll be made to feel like your reality isn't real. And that feeling of not being able to trust your own experience, is so destabilizing that your brain would rather work overtime forever than feel it again. Or maybe it wasn't about being contradicted. Maybe it was about prediction. Maybe you grew up in a house where the rules changed depending on mood, where something that was fine yesterday could get you yelled at today. Where you were constantly trying to figure out the pattern, trying to understand the logic so you could navigate safely, and the only way to do that was to pay attention, obsessive attention, to remember what was said when, to track the variables, to become a detective of emotional weather patterns because that's what survival required. So you started cataloging, not consciously, not intentionally. But your brain started filing away every conversation, every interaction, every tonal shift, every contradiction, building a database of information that you could reference later to predict what might happen next, to avoid mistakes, to stay safe, to make sure you were never caught off guard by a rule you didn't know existed or a mood shift you didn't see coming. And it worked. You got good at it. Scary good. You could walk into a room and within seconds assess the emotional climate. You could predict arguments before they started. You could tell when someone was lying or hiding something or about to snap. You became fluent in subtext, in body language, in all the things people don't say but communicate anyway. And that skill, that heightened awareness, it kept you safe. It gave you some small measure of control in a situation where you otherwise had very little. But here's the thing about skills that develop out of necessity. They don't turn off when the threat goes away. They become part of how you operate, part of your wiring. So now as an adult, you still remember everything. Not because you're trying to, not because you think it's useful, but because your brain is still running the same program it installed when you were 8 years old. The program that says details matter, that missing something could be dangerous, that you need to remember because forgetting means vulnerability. Now in your adult life, this shows up in ways that can seem both impressive and exhausting. You're the person who remembers what your coworker said in a meeting 6 months ago, when they're now claiming they never said it. You remember the exact phrasing of a text message from 2 years ago. You can recall entire arguments with precision, which means you're right a lot, but it also means you can't let things go because the evidence is permanently filed in your head. People are sometimes amazed by this. How do you remember that? And you don't really know how to answer because to you, it's not remarkable. You're not trying to remember. You just do. It's automatic, like breathing. You don't have a choice in the matter. The information just gets stored, cataloged, indexed, ready for retrieval whether you want it or not. But here's what people don't see: the cost. Because remembering everything means you can't forget the bad stuff either. You can't let go of hurtful comments because you remember them verbatim. You can't move past arguments because you can replay them in perfect detail. You can't give people the benefit of the doubt when they contradict themselves because you have a precise record of what they said before. Your memory isn't just a gift, it's also a burden. A filing cabinet full of information you can't delete. And there's another layer to this. People who remember conversations word for word are also usually people who notice patterns, because that's what hypervigilance does. It doesn't just record information, it analyzes it, looks for connections, builds models of how people behave, and this makes you exceptionally good at reading people, at predicting behavior, at seeing through inconsistencies and lies in performance. You can tell when someone's story doesn't add up because you remember what they said last week and it contradicts what they're saying now. You can sense when someone's feelings don't match their words because you're tracking micro-expressions, tone shifts, all the tiny signals most people miss. And this pattern recognition, this ability to synthesize information and see the bigger picture, this is another survival skill, another adaptation. Another way your brain learned to keep you safe by making the world more predictable. But here's the paradox. The very skill that helped you survive an unpredictable childhood makes adult relationships complicated because most people don't operate at that level of precision. Most people forget things they said, misremember details, contradict themselves without realizing it, not because they're lying, but because their memory is normal, because they weren't cataloging everything the way you were, because they didn't have to. And when you point out these inconsistencies, when you remember something they said that they've forgotten, it can create tension. They might feel attacked, caught, accused of lying when from their perspective they just misremembered. They might think you're keeping score, that you're holding on to things you should let go, that you're being controlling or manipulative by weaponizing memory, when really, you're just existing with a brain that works differently. That remembers differently. That can't not remember. There's research on this. Studies on how chronic stress and unpredictability in childhood affect memory formation. What they found is that children in high-stress environments often develop what's called superior autobiographical memory for emotionally significant events. Their brains become exceptionally good at encoding and retrieving information that has survival relevance. And in an unstable environment, everything has survival relevance. Every conversation, every mood shift, every contradiction. Neuroscientists have found that the amygdala, the part of the brain involved in emotional processing and threat detection, becomes hyperactive in people who grew up in unpredictable environments. And when the amygdala is involved in memory formation, those memories get encoded more deeply, more permanently, with more detail. Which is why you can remember conversations from 10 years ago with clarity that feels almost photographic. Not because your hippocampus is special, but because your amygdala tagged those moments as important, as worth remembering, as potentially relevant to your survival. And this is where it gets interesting. Because this trait, this ability to remember with such precision, it's not actually about having a better memory than other people. It's about having a different relationship with information. For most people, conversations are casual, fluid. They remember the general gist, the emotional tone, the main points. But the specifics fade because they don't need them. Their safety never depended on remembering exact words. But for you, exact words matter. Because exact words were evidence. Proof. The thing you could point to when someone tried to rewrite history. When someone claimed they never said something you know they said. When reality felt like it was shifting under your feet and the only thing you could hold on to was your own memory. And that's why this trait is so closely linked to environments where gaslighting occurred. Where your perception of reality was regularly challenged, where you were told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, making things up, remembering wrong, and your brain, in response, decided to become an absolutely meticulous record keeper, to document everything, to hold on to evidence, to make sure that no matter what anyone said, you would know what actually happened. But living like this is exhausting, because you can't turn it off. You're constantly recording, constantly cataloging, constantly cross-referencing new information with old information to check for consistency. Your brain is running a background process at all times that most people's brains simply don't run, and it takes energy, cognitive energy, emotional energy, the kind that drains you in ways that are hard to explain to people who don't live like this. And there's a loneliness in it too, because you remember things about people that they don't remember about themselves. You carry pieces of their history that they've let go of. You notice patterns in their behavior that they're completely unaware of. And you can't always share what you see because it makes you sound like you're surveilling them, like you're keeping files, like you're some kind of detective who can't just let people be human and messy and inconsistent. But you're not trying to catch anyone. You're not trying to win arguments or prove people wrong. You're just existing with a brain that works this way, that learned this way of processing information before you were old enough to choose it. And now it's part of you, part of how you move through the world, part of what makes you, you. And here's the thing, this trait, as complicated as it is, also gives you gifts, real gifts. You're probably an incredibly loyal friend because you remember the small things people tell you. You remember what matters to them. You remember their stories. You make people feel seen and heard in ways that are rare because you're actually paying attention at a level most people can't sustain. You're probably also exceptionally good at your work, especially if it involves details, patterns, analysis, anything that requires holding multiple pieces of information and seeing how they connect. Your brain is built for that, optimized for it. What started as a survival mechanism has become a genuine cognitive strength. But it's okay to acknowledge that it's also hard, that remembering everything means carrying everything, that you can't selectively forget the painful stuff, that your memory is both a superpower and a weight you didn't ask to carry. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this: you're not overthinking. You're not being petty or holding grudges or refusing to let things go. You're just living with a brain that adapted to survive a specific kind of childhood, a brain that learned to pay attention because not paying attention was dangerous. A brain that remembers because forgetting meant losing your grip on reality. That's not a flaw. That's not something you need to fix or apologize for. That's an adaptation, a testament to your resilience, to your brain's incredible ability to develop the exact skills you needed to make it through. And if other people don't understand why you remember things they've forgotten, that's okay. They don't have to understand. They didn't live your childhood. They didn't need to develop this skill. Their survival didn't depend on cataloging every conversation and analyzing every contradiction and holding on to evidence of what was real, but yours did. And you did what you had to do. And the fact that you're here with this exceptional memory and this ability to see patterns and this deep awareness of how people work, that's not an accident. That's you. That's what you built to survive. And it's allowed you to do more than survive. It's allowed you to understand the world and the people in it at a level that's genuinely rare. So no, it's not just a good memory. It's vigilance that never learned to rest. It's a survival skill that became part of your identity. It's your brain's way of saying, I will never be caught off guard again. I will never lose track of what's real. I will remember. And that's both a gift and a burden. But it's yours. And it makes sense. All of it makes sense.